Well, Richard, we're 1 week on. What's the mood where you are in Jerusalem?
I think it's a mixture still of shock and grief for many people. I can tell you that in my neighbourhood, we lost one of our neighbours, lost their son, and impromptu, the whole neighbourhood came out to greet the family and to escort them off as they went off to the funeral. So there's a lot of sadness, a lot of grief, but at the same time, there is also a stoicism to Israeli society. I think probably something akin to what the British experienced during the Second World War, where you just have to get on with it. You roll up your sleeves, you understand that this is going to be a long and difficult period in front of us, and so one just has to get on.
Is there any type of frustration that the intelligence services, their intelligence services, did not pick this up?
There is a lot of concern over that. There are still lots of questions over exactly this was allowed to happen, but at the same time, people have put that aside, and I think there will be time for recrimination and investigations afterwards. But right now, it's still too raw, and there is still an active event in process. So I think we'll only get to that at a later stage.
If we look back, further back than last Saturday, um, can you see now how anything was different? Were there any pointers towards a frustration level getting to this stage?
I mean, the opposite is actually the case because the conversations that took place in the weeks and months leading up to last weekend were all working on the understanding that Hamas didn't want an escalation, that Hamas wanted to improve the lives of the Gazan citizenry, and kind of efforts were underway to expand the work permits for Gazans coming to work inside Israel, to make all sorts of other moves to allow the Gazans to live better, and that was the nature of the conversation. So no, this really took a lot of people completely by surprise. And in fact, just this evening, Israel's national security advisor admitted it and said that he was apologizing that on behalf of himself and the security establishment, they got this wrong and very badly wrong.
There will be a lot of people here in the UK reading into this story in depth, maybe for the first time ever, and trying to understand the basics, the hinterland to all that has gone on. And we're hearing, aren't we, from the Palestinian side, and obviously the whole point of this is there are two narratives, two sides to this. The Palestinians saying that they've been oppressed, that they have not been given basic human rights, and enough is enough.
Listen, there are two sides. We've been in for 30 years now. We've been in a process, not with Hamas, of course, but with the more moderate side of the Palestinian society, and working towards getting the Palestinians independence and statehood. That was the name of the game, of two states living side by side. And although this had not been advanced in recent times, there is still certain confidence building measures and certain areas of cooperation. And we're talking more about Israel in regard to the Palestinians on the West Bank. But Hamas, as we now know, are a radical jihadi organization that has no desire to live alongside Israel. They're looking to replace Israel.
Talk to us about the strength of Hamas in terms of numbers. Like, how dominant are they in that area? What is their relationship with the local population, for example?
So I mean, when one talks about Hamas, we talk about that they have a political wing which has complete control over the Gaza Strip. By the way, since they took it over in a brutal coup against the Palestinian Authority back in 2006, and so since then they run a dictatorial, autocratic regime there. They have a lot of internal security to suppress their public there, and I think we're seeing examples of that in the last few days, when Israel is trying to clear a free passage for the civilians to get out of the areas where the Hamas are embedded in. That Hamas themselves are stopping their own population because they want to keep them there as human shields. There are probably tens of thousands of Hamas military operators as well, and they get sustained most likely from Iran through smuggling in of weapons, and that's kind of the example of those weapons we saw sadly to use to their effect last weekend.
And in terms of the Israeli response, do you think, Richard, looking from the outside, do you think it's proportionate?
So I don't think, listen, proportionate is a question that often occupies itself in these sorts of conversations. It's proportionate to the threat that Hamas carry over Israel, and we saw that threat exercised last weekend. I don't want to go back into details. I'm sure you and your listeners are familiar with it, but we have really seen horrific scenes, and that's why the nature of the response will be proportionate to the threat that Hamas faces. But let's be clear that Israel, unlike Hamas, who is targeting deliberately civilians, Israel is only targeting the Hamas military infrastructure. And sadly, that's buried underground. They have spent all the money that the international community has given them over the years, have focused it on building up their military powers, of digging underground this labyrinth of tunnels they refer to as the metro system, which is built under people's homes. That's why the civilian population is now being asked to leave that area.
Well, they're being asked to do an impossibility, aren't they? Leave the area in 24 hours and go where?
Well, they have to. It's for their own safety. I mean, none of this was Israel's design. This has all been imposed on it by the fact of Hamas and their actions. But they are clearing. They have identified that the northern area of the Gaza Strip is a particularly fortified area with the infrastructure of an army that Hamas has, and that's the area that they have to leave. The Gaza Strip is not a big area, of course, but there are still some safe places in which they can go.
This is also about keeping the international community on board, isn't it? For both sides, actually, for Palestinians who want a better life, for Israelis who are trying to get people to understand just the 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 the, the depravity of what happened. I can't find a word to describe what happened last Saturday. No words to describe what we saw there. But when we then hear, Richard, in the news yesterday that a hospital has been given 24 hours, the deadline was extended, to evacuate all those patients. Can you understand why some people start wondering, start questioning why the Israelis would do that to patients, to sick people in a hospital? Evacuate? How?
Again, I think the answer here, from the way that we understand it here in Israel, is that hospital, Shifa Hospital, that the Hamas have again deliberately used that hospital, that they hold their command and control center underneath the hospital. So the last thing Israel wants to do is God forbid to attack a hospital. So the least bad option at the moment is to ask them the staff to leave the place so that they can then approach and attack the Hamas military infrastructure. This is a double war crime by Hamas. Not only are they attacking civilians, but they're also using their own civilians as human shields.
It would be a war crime to bomb a hospital, wouldn't it?
I don't think Israel would bomb a hospital. That's not on the agenda. And in fact, as I said, Israel goes to remarkable lengths to avoid civilian casualties. You never an army in the history of warfare do they send text messages and voicemail messages to people in a building to say that you have Hamas operatives in your building. Get out that building because it's going to be attacked. It kind of loses the option of surprise or understanding where the enemy will strike by sending these warnings. And similarly, they have a process what they call the knock on the roof, where they send a small ordnance down onto a building to give a signal that is a building that's going to be attacked. It's in terms of you mentioned before the public relations effort. This comes secondary, but still, it's more about Israel for their own principles. Israel is a liberal democracy and understands that it has to fight wars according to the same rules and guidelines of other democracies. So it will not be forced into to attacking and wants to do everything it can to avoid the civilian casualties.
Is there, when we see how Hamas has taken those hostages, do you think those hostages will ever return home safe? Is there any way that can happen, do you think?
I don't know. I don't think anyone knows at this point. I mean, what's really happening right now, still in Israel, is that they've appointed someone to conduct a coordinated effort on behalf of those hostages. They're still kind of gathering the numbers of exactly who has been taken and who is there. I think it's going to be very difficult. I mean, there are classically two ways in which you free hostages. You either go into negotiations, and at this point, I think that's highly unlikely because Hamas's demands are to free up in return for the hostages, free up terrorists who are serving time in Israeli prisons, and that would give Hamas an extra victory, let alone allowing more unrepentant terrorists onto the street to potentially carry out further attacks. So I don't think that's on the agenda. And the other way, classically, is by special forces going in and offering a kind of a rescue mission. And I think because of the complexity of Gaza, that also looks highly unlikely. Although again, it's possible these things are being planned. I'm not privy to the military plans. There is a hope that that some audacious efforts will be made to free some of the hostages. But I agree, it looks pretty bleak right now.
Richard, what's your analysis of a solution to this? It's not going to be through bombs and bullets, is it?
No, I mean, listen. This problem has been with us already for 17 years since Hamas took over the Gaza Strip. There have been various rounds of fighting, but this is on a different level of magnitude. What I would like to say is to see leadership, and although there's plenty of kind of criticism of Israeli leaders, we'd love to see a Palestinian leader come up and forcefully renounce what Hamas is doing and offer a different way. I think that that's what's necessary right now, is to find leadership that understands that to save lives on both sides, one needs to come together. One needs to recognize each other's right to exist, and move on from there. As I said, to aim towards a two-state solution.
And do you think that is the negotiating position that could achieve a solution here?
Eventually, as I said, I think it's still too raw. It's not on anyone's agenda right now. It wasn't, if we're honest, it wasn't really on the agenda even before this series of attacks. And I think it's these attacks have moved that further away. But for those of us that live in this region, that understand that kind of Israelis and Palestinians are destined to share this land, and that for the good of all our children and a peaceful future, then yes, I think that sort of recognition and reconciliation, although difficult right now, is the only path ahead.
And finally, what's it been like where you are today?
So today it's been very quiet. I mean, we saw again, Hamas has been trying to engage and encourage other parts of the Palestinian diaspora and the Arab world generally. They called for a day of rage. It didn't really come about on Friday, thankfully. Again, I mean, where I'm in here, I mentioned kind of in southern Jerusalem here, we're on the edge, not far from what they refer to as the seam line. I have Arab and Palestinian neighbours just a couple of kilometres away. And I would say that in normal times, beyond the headlines, Jerusalem is a city of coexistence where Jews and Arabs interact and get on every day and kind of get on with their lives and understand that there is a vested interest that to secure that future for both peoples. So right now things are tense. I mean, we haven't spoken about it, but there was also tension on Israel's northern border where the Hezbollah, which is even a far stronger threat technically, has been provoking Israel. They sent over 30 mortars onto northern Israel this afternoon, kind of reaching a threshold in which they are antagonizing and threatening Israel, but below the threshold of opening up a full second front. But people here in Israel are very wary of that threat, and so things remain very tense here.
Richard, thank you for talking to me tonight. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your interest.